If you go back just 100 years, this structure was being built stone by stone by a single man working entirely alone, refusing to let anyone watch him do it. But today, if you visit Homestead, Florida, you can walk through the finished result and still find engineers unable to explain exactly how he pulled it off. It's called Coral Castle, and it has been documented by structural surveyors to consist of over 100 tons of quarried limestone, individually cut, transported, and precisely assembled by one man with no formal engineering training, no modern machinery, and no witnesses of any kind. But if this was really built by a single person working alone, how is that even physically possible? And if he claimed to have rediscovered the same method used to build the pyramids, should we take that seriously? Let's find out. The idea of one person moving stone at a scale normally requiring an entire workforce is one of the strangest engineering claims in modern history. We've already covered a version of this problem. Ancient builders used to work with massive stone at scale, using coordinated teams of laborers, sledges, and levers to move and place multi-ton blocks. But those were organized civilizations with thousands of workers. What happened in Florida in the 20th century was something else entirely. A single individual, working mostly at night, claiming to move blocks weighing as much as 30 tons using nothing anyone ever saw. In the small town of Florida City in 1923, a Latvian immigrant named Edward Leedskalnin faced a problem no ordinary laborer could solve. Standing barely 5 feet tall and weighing around 100 pounds, he had been left at the altar by his fiancée back in Latvia just one day before their wedding, and he arrived in America afterward with almost no money, no construction crew, and no reason anyone could see for what he was about to attempt. Conventional quarrying required teams of men, animal-drawn equipment, and eventually diesel-powered cranes to move stone at any meaningful scale. Leedskalnin had access to none of it. So, over the following years, working largely by lantern light after dark, he began quarrying solid Ullaitla limestone directly out of the coral bedrock beneath his own property and moving it into position using a method he refused to explain to a single living person. And unlike anything built by a conventional construction crew, this structure took shape one solitary night at a time, requiring no hired labor, no financed machinery, and no outside assistance of any kind. Leedskalnin's process was simple to observe from a distance, yet extraordinarily secretive up close, drawing on what appears to be 3 separate mechanical principles working together to move stone far beyond what a single man should be able to lift. He quarried the coral limestone directly from his property using hand tools, cutting blocks that in some documented cases exceeded 30 tons, larger than several of the stones used in ancient megalithic construction. The first principle at work was almost certainly leverage. Witnesses who caught brief, distant glimpses of his work described seeing block and tackle systems, tripods built from wooden poles, and hand-cranked winches positioned near the quarry site, the same basic mechanical advantage tools that have moved heavy loads for millennia. The key point here is that unlike a modern crane, which multiplies force through hydraulics and engine power, these tools multiply force purely through geometry, meaning a single person turning a hand crank slowly enough could theoretically move a load many times their own body weight. But here's what most people don't realize. The construction didn't stop at simply lifting the stone once. You see, Leedskalnin also relied on something researchers now call incremental repositioning, where a block wasn't moved directly from quarry to final position in one motion, but shifted a short distance at a time, re-anchored and shifted again, a slow method that trades speed for the ability to be performed entirely by one person working alone. In a structure built over nearly 3 decades, this incremental process meant that no single lift ever had to exceed what one man and a simple mechanical system could manage, even if the cumulative tonnage moved over the decades was staggering. The third principle was almost certainly the center of gravity manipulation visible in the finished stones themselves. Several of the massive coral blocks in the castle are balanced and rotate freely on a central pivot point, including a 9-ton gate that for decades could reportedly be pushed open with a single finger. All three of these techniques compound one another. The result is a structure where the finished stonework shows clear evidence of sophisticated mechanical thinking, even though almost none of the actual working method was ever documented while it happened. And this solitary technique has been proven, at minimum, to be structurally sound by modern standards. Engineering surveys conducted after the site became a public attraction confirmed that Leedskalnin's stonework has remained stable and largely undisturbed for nearly a century, with the famous rotating gate still functioning on its original pivot point decades after his death. And measurements taken of individual blocks confirmed weights ranging from several tons up to the widely cited 30-ton stones forming the structure's outer wall, figures independently verified rather than simply taken from Leedskalnin's own claims. To put that in practical terms, moving a single 30-ton block using only hand tools and simple machines would require careful, patient engineering even for a full team of laborers. Leedskalnin apparently did this alone, at night, over and over again, for the better part of 30 years. And because he refused to let anyone witness the actual moment of lifting or positioning a stone, every observer account that survives describes only the results, never the method in progress. But these accounts come with an important caveat, and it's part of the reason his exact technique has never been definitively confirmed. A modern experimental archaeology attempt to replicate similar large stone movement using period-appropriate tools found that a small team using tripod lifts and lever systems could indeed move multi-ton blocks with a manageable degree of physical effort. But doing so entirely alone, without a second person to help stabilize a suspended load, introduces significant additional difficulty and risk. Their conclusion was that while one person's stone moving is not physically impossible using basic mechanical advantage, Leedskalnin's specific undocumented method remains unverified rather than definitively explained. And this is where the mystery becomes central to the story itself. A technique demonstrated only in private by a single practitioner who took his exact process to the grave cannot be fully confirmed no matter how plausible the general mechanical explanation appears. But the unverified method is only one piece of the story. The most problematic issue was Leedskalnin's own claims. The defining feature of his public statements, hinting that he understood the same principles used to build the Egyptian pyramids, is also what fueled decades of speculation far beyond simple mechanical leverage. As his fame grew during his lifetime, and especially after his death in 1951, various theories involving magnetism, terrestrial energy, and forces beyond conventional physics attach themselves to a story that plausible engineering alone could already explain. And there's a more subtle documentation problem, a kind of self-imposed secrecy. This occurs when a builder deliberately prevents any witness from observing his working method because maintaining that mystery may have been just as important to him as the structure itself. Because Leedskalnin left behind pamphlets about magnetism and electricity, but no direct explanation of his stone-moving technique, most surviving evidence of his method comes down to us as informed speculation rather than a confirmed process. For this reason, later researchers and engineers have had to reconstruct plausible explanations after the fact. And because no eyewitness account of an actual lift survives in detail, the technique remains officially unconfirmed even where it appears mechanically straightforward. But beyond the missing method, there is the issue of site preservation. The structure sat on Leedskalnin's original property for decades before being relocated intact to Homestead, Florida in 1936, reportedly moved again using the same undisclosed methods. Conventional stone structures, by comparison, are rarely moved once assembled, meaning the castle's relocation itself adds another layer to a story already built on unexplained feats. Researchers across the field of experimental archaeology have frequently proposed similar, plausible mechanical explanations for other undocumented megalithic movements, because the general principle of leverage and patience could explain many historical feats without requiring anything beyond known physics. And even where modern engineers have built working-scale demonstrations showing that a single determined person could theoretically move comparable stones using period tools, confirming that this was precisely Leedskalnin's method requires evidence that simply no longer exists. Public fascination has also made it more difficult to separate fact from embellishment over time. As the site's popularity as a roadside attraction grew throughout the 20th century, promotional materials increasingly leaned into the mystery angle rather than the more mundane mechanical explanation, because unresolved wonder draws more visitors than a straightforward lever and pulley story. Because the site's own historical marketing depended on maintaining an air of the unexplained, it fell into a kind of self-perpetuating mystery that outlasted any purely engineering-based account. So the real question we should be asking now is what Coral Castle actually proves about individual human capability. And the honest answer depends entirely on how much weight you give unverified circumstantial evidence versus plausible mechanical explanation. If you take the structure itself as the primary evidence, the finished stonework, the pivoting gate, the precisely balanced blocks, Leedskalnin's achievement remains one of the most remarkable examples of individual persistence and applied mechanical ingenuity documented in the modern era. The site's tools recovered after his death, various winches, chains, and tripod components, closely match what basic physics would require to accomplish what he built. For anyone drawn to stories of what a single determined person can accomplish without institutional resources, the physical structure alone offers a compelling, still-standing answer. And because the site continues to be studied by engineers and physicists rather than dismissed outright, its genuine mechanical mysteries keep drawing serious, credentialed attention rather than fading into pure folklore. But without a documented eyewitness account of Leedskalnin's actual working method, treating any single explanation as definitively proven is probably not a realistic conclusion. In the absence of that missing evidence, both the plausible leverage-based explanation and any more exotic theory remain fundamentally unconfirmed, and a field where speculation can easily outpace verified fact requires acknowledging that gap honestly rather than filling it with certainty either direction offers. In reality, for most engineers and historians examining Coral Castle today, treating it as a genuinely remarkable but ultimately unverified achievement rather than either a fully solved mechanical puzzle or a fringe phenomenon requiring exotic physics is probably the more responsible position. A single unexplained construction method demonstrates extraordinary individual persistence, delivering a fascinating but honestly incomplete piece of the historical record. And because drawing firm conclusions doesn't depend on assuming either a mundane certainty or an unproven exotic mechanism, It avoids the overreach that this particular mystery has invited for nearly a century. There is no surviving footage of him lifting a single stone, no confirmed diagram of his exact tripod configuration, and no risk of overstating what a self-taught immigrant working alone in the dark actually left us to examine. It just still stands in Homestead, Florida, and it still leaves engineers who visit it quietly impressed. If you like this video and enjoy learning about individuals who accomplished things institutions couldn't explain, then subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure this kind of knowledge keeps being found. And if you want to see how a Byzantine weapon burned even on open water, using a formula so secret it disappeared completely when the empire that guarded it finally fell, then you need to watch our video on Greek fire, right here.